One of the key criticisms of the boomers is they got all the money, they got all the wealth, all the power as well. You're doing this scene where you've got Werther's Originals, I think, which I loved. I was like, I did a little nod to the old elderly there. And you're filling up a jar and you show that the boomers basically in every Western economy control like a large portion of the wealth. And you've just said there that they're the biggest voting bloc as well. One question, first of all, shouldn't they have the most wealth and the most power because they've got the most lived experience? You know, they're going to be the best leaders. Should we not look up to our elders and go, you've got the wisdom? And they'll have the most money because they've been compounding it for longer than a 20-year-old. You know?
Yeah. No. So there's probably always going to be an extent to which older parts of the population will have more money, whether that's cash or whether that's wealth, than younger people, right? As you say, if you've been saving or investing, it's had longer to build. If you bought a house and the value of that house has gone up, then that's going to have happened. If you've been in your career longer, you're probably going to have had chances for promotions and for bonuses and pay rises and what have you. What we've seen is, I don't have the exact figures on me, but is that the proportion of the wealth that is kind of owned, controlled, whatever you want to say, by that baby boomer portion of the population, or by the age cohort, which is now the baby boomers, has increased over
20%.
time. Over the,
I've got it written here. So it's gone from 45 to 67.5 since. This is your stats, not mine. I'm just coming in and taking the glory, a bit like this guy, since 2005.
Yeah.
So are you saying that's the problem, that 20-odd%?
And those might be US statistics if they're from the film.
I mean, maybe it's, if it's America, if it's the UK, what you're saying is that there's been a huge shift since the millennium, basically, in the percentage of the wealth that cohort holds as the total.
And I think a lot of that is... To sort of, I guess, to go into some marks accidentally, sort of, wealth is as much like a social relation as it is a sort of thing that you have, right? So a shift in the way that we view housing actually can look up numbers like that, and it can look like we have the same amount of stuff and it's just in different places. Whereas actually, we can be in a place wherein what's actually happened is that our relationship with stuff like pensions and stuff like housing has changed in a way that shifts those numbers because the things that we do with wealth have changed. In actual fact, my mum has the same amount of houses as she had when she was like 30 years ago, right? She still has one house. The value of that house in relation to in inflation or whatever has gone up. And therefore that appears in a certain way on paper in some of those statistics, in a way that looks like things have moved around, whereas actually what's happened is that, you know, there has been a shift in our relationship with pensions, or relationship with houses, rather than just like numbers moving around on the sheet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I made a video recently where I looked at like the median savings by age and where the money's kept. And one way to present that data is to go, here's the median 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, all the way up. So by the time you're 60, you should be there. But actually what you're looking at is a snapshot of a timeline of circumstances and housing markets and pensions that won't be replicated. So the 20-year-old today can't sit there and go, I will have a median 250K by the time I get to 60. But it's almost like we imply it's a conveyor belt, whereas actually it's a completely different set of rules now, really, for someone in their 20s.
Yeah, because a COVID hits or a 2008 hits or something like that. And things do change, but also the world around you changes. As you say, 30 years ago, having a certain amount of savings, that could have been even adjusted for inflation, maybe could have been a house deposit in a way that maybe it isn't now. Yeah, I mean, that's always the challenge with, I guess, planning ahead financially, or I guess in many other ways as well, that the world is going to kind of change around that as well.
It does you well not to look at too far ahead and go, oh, well, that's where I need to be, because they have certainty around things like state pension.
Yeah.
So, for example, they know that I'm getting that, whereas we don't. We don't know that. So we can't, like, to them, 50 to 60% of the UK population, state pension is half of their retirement. So it's a massive, like, safety blanket.
Yeah.
You know, to us, we probably have to plan that it's not going to be there.
It'd be very surprising if the state pension disappeared.
Yeah, but I mean, they might just
tomorrow.
But
in terms of us,
they might inflate it away.
There's a much longer trajectory to look ahead to, and a lot more time in which that could happen.
So they could have a smaller retirement pot because of the certainty around the state pension, you know, or they've got a DB scheme, or
And that's really, I mean, it's worth saying. Want to come back to the point that there was a lot of uncertainty in the boomers' lives as well. When they got to working age, there was real challenges in terms of, or real worries at least in terms of, are this massive cohort of people all going to be able to find jobs? Because suddenly, like each year, we've got we've got these big blocks of people coming through, and at the same time as the period of time where women haven't worked is actually relatively short in the middle of the 20th century, but during the kind of period in which the boomers are coming to age is also a period of time in which a lot of women who 10 years previously maybe would have stayed at home to look after children in that kind of stereotypical heterosexual couple with the woman at home and the are also entering the workforce. So you get kind of this double factor of just like a lot of people to find jobs for. And, in actual fact, over time, more people with more jobs means there's more stuff you need to make, and that kind of worked itself out. I think one of the big shifts, and this sort of going back to the pensions point, though, is kind of around stability. I think we've had this shift towards kind of a much more individualistic society, but also a much more individualistic way of looking at finance, looking at economics. We've kind of moved away from that system of you get a job and you get a kind of company pension scheme, and you're kind of like the work will sort it out, and you walk, and you've got kind of maybe a state pension to back that up as well, to a kind of system where one view of it is that we have a lot more freedom. So I talked to David Willett, who's a conservative lord in the film, and he's like, it's great. Like, you've got a lot more freedom in terms of choosing where you invest your pension or whatever, which for some people I think is probably really important. I would imagine that the kind of listeners of this are probably have kind of like selected into probably being the people that maybe do value that, and going, I'm gonna, I want to make sure it's in a high risk, high growth kind of pot rather than having it all in bonds or whatever. For most people, whether they actually act on that freedom and whether that's something that they actually think is important and useful is maybe lower. But one of the kind of side effects of that has been that there is, I mean, as we were just saying about pensions, there is that lack of stability. If things go wrong, you're much more on your own as well. I think we've become a much more kind of succeed or sink kind of society. And we kind of see that in a lot of the kind of economics of the stuff we talk about. And we talk about like housing as well, in terms of, throughout much of the 20th century, the shift within the UK was that we would build a system of social housing, which if you were in need, and actually for a lot of the century, it was also like an option that you could choose. You could just go, I don't want to own a house. I want to rent a house from the council, and I'll have decent tenants' rights. It'll be reasonably affordable. We've kind of shifted away from that because enough people liked the idea that, I can buy my house and this actually could be great for me. Like I could get really wealthy. I mean, how housing wealth actually translates into real wealth is maybe a different question.
You can't eat bricks.
Yeah, you can't eat bricks. Yeah. I think it's Mervyn King that said something about like it's housing wealth is like made up. It's a number, and other than the fact that it's money that you're not. It's like money that you're not spending rather than money that you have. Yeah. Which maybe that's all wealth, but yeah, we used to have all these kind of systems in place, and by my reading, one of the things that sort of enabled the boomers to have a reasonable kind of run at things well, there were some of these fallbacks where we'd go, do you know what, if you end up in a really shit position, there's like, you know, there's a decent rented housing option. That doesn't exist anymore. So I think, you know, there's probably an argument that you can sort of soar higher if you, and some people would say that's, you know, if you have the pluck and ambition. Some people would say that's if you're in the right place at the right time. But I think we've unfortunately kind of got to a place where, you know, looking ahead at our potential hopeful retirements is a case of, are we able to kind of get through, or do we have a really bad time of it, rather than do we have an all right time of it?
This was a clip from our chat with YouTuber Tom Nicholas. To watch the full episode, click right here.